In my last art ranking video, I did somewhat suggest that the long blade was pretty mid overall, and I still stand by that. However, I do think that God Eater 3 has the best and overall most fun iteration of the long blade. Out of all 3 games in the series, 3 is definitely the entry that I ended up using this weapon the most in. Anyway, Morning Calm, a light attack combo. It has an increased OP gain, and it's very pleasing to look at. Outside of that, it's not too different from the other light attack combo moves I've covered before. B tier. Lifestealer Claw, a light attack combo finisher, basically God Eater 3's equivalent to Vampiric Blade. As the name suggests, it has a lifesteal bonus that restores HP when it hits. I also like the visual blood-soaked claw effect as well, much like what the Scythe had. B tier, just like it had in God Eater 2. Aegis Caliber is a heavy attack combo in God Eater 3's version of Barrier Slide. It has super armor just like it did previously, but I didn't find it any more useful here than I did back in 2. C tier once again. Swift Slash is a zero stance move and the falling pedal of this game. When you perform zero stance, your character will pause for a second, raise the now glowing blade over their head, and then if you press square again, slice downwards. Now, unlike God Eater 2's version, I don't think this one has a weak point bonus, but it's still pretty strong. And considering God Eater 3's scaling, probably doesn't even need it. Still an S tier. And still very fun to use. Flame of Purgatory, an impulse edge move. First of all, some clarification for the previous long blade video for God Eater 2. Impulse edge does scale with your gun stats for both games. What happened was, it apparently used to scale with the blade, but it was too powerful, so they adjusted it in a later patch in God Eater 2. So, it scales with the gun and continues to scale with the gun in God Eater 3. Though even then, I'm still inclined to believe that it did most likely get a buff between that patch of God Eater 2 and God Eater 3. But yes, to answer that question from previously, it does scale with the gun. Anyway, back to the art itself. Flame of Purgatory deals crushing damage to the target by firing an explosion from the tucked away gun portion of the weapon. Actually, it's going to be the closest you're going to get to having a blast gun in this game. RIP. On top of giving you alternative damage options, since the long blade exclusively deals slashing damage, this move is also extremely powerful, as I hinted at before. It only takes a few hits for this thing to break most bonds, provided the body part you're targeting is weak to crushing. Also, this is not something I realized until I already had this specific footage up in the editor. The explosion is actually a bunch of little spectral long blades that jut out when the explosion goes off, which is a nice touch. S tier. I love this move so much. Shining Ray, another impulse edge move. The piercing ray gun equivalent to the last one. It's a simple ray of light. The range is actually pretty far, which is cool, and also, find the hidden long blade. A tier. Gunner's Paradise, the final impulse edge move. I guess this would be the assault gun version. You fire a bunch of smaller projectiles at the target, but of course it can be rapid fired, so the damage adds up. Once again, find the hidden long blade. This was actually the first move where I started realizing that the projectiles were little long blades. Anyway, B tier. I like it the least out of the 3, but it's not awful. Soul Splitter, the only other zero stance move. It's a counterattack, so if nothing hits you, the move doesn't do anything. Your character will go into a defensive position. If you get hit while in that stance, they'll counter. A few things to keep in mind though. First of all, when you counter, you still take a little bit of damage. Second, the damage from the counterattack is proportional to how strong the enemy's attack was, though it does pierce armor, so even countering weak attacks usually still has a decent return on investment. And third, this doesn't protect you from Devour attacks. It's overall a decent move despite those drawbacks. The time window is very generous, so even if you kind of suck at the timing, you can still pull this off pretty consistently. I do wish it had a just guarding equivalent though, where if you counter at just the right time, you don't take any damage, and then the counter hit gets buffed a bit. But even without that, this is still a pretty fun art to use. A tier. Sacred Edge is an aerial light attack combo finisher. Whew, that's a mouthful. Your character dishes out a swing on the third hit with an element bonus. It also shifts you a little to the left when you execute it. C tier. Void Cutter, an aerial heavy attack combo. God Eater 3's equivalent to Apsara Wheel from the last game. You flip forward a bit and you can chain the attack up to 3 times. This is probably the most useful aerial attack you'll have for this weapon, since there's no more equivalent to Slaughter Gear anymore. A tier. Spinning Descent, another aerial heavy attack. This one's a bit simpler, you just slam the sword into the ground. It doesn't have any other special effects besides the increased damage. I found it to be useful as an add-on to a ground-based layout, so if you're fighting an origami and it isn't flying, which is most of them to be fair, and you need an aerial move that will quickly put you back on the ground if you find yourself in the air, yeah, it's pretty good for that. A tier. Void Cutter is a bit better overall for me, but Spinning Descent is decent as well, and it has its purpose. Whirlwind Sword, a light step attack. Your character swings upward in a scooping motion. It has an increased OP gain when it hits, and it also looks really cool. Kinda has that Midnight Feather look to it. My personal go-to when it comes to step attacks for this weapon. S tier. Flashing Blade, another light step attack. The character dashes forward and slices sideways. Can we also talk about the particle effect? You use the move and the streak just kinda sits there for a second and then crumbles into little pieces. Nice touch. This one looks very similar to Gale Strike from God Eater 2, but it doesn't come with the extra ticks of damage that go off when you pass through the enemy. Now granted, and this is surprisingly the first time I'm mentioning this, there is a burst art effect called Lingering Fang, and it does kind of recreate the same effect. Even without it, A tier. It fell off a little bit, but not much. Apsara Wings, a heavy step attack where your character scrapes the weapon across the floor and then swings upward. This does leave you suspended in the air and you can follow up with an aerial combo. It also looks a bit similar to Flashing Blade, where the weapon streak dissolves into a mixture of sparks and feathers after a split second. S tier. Honestly, it looks really cool. And that's it. All Longblade burst darts in God Eater 3 ranked. You guys know what to do. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, sub to the channel if you haven't already. Special thanks to all channel members for your continued support. It's much appreciated, and I will see you all again very soon.